Welcome, everybody. The ATP Technology-Based Assessment Committee is really pleased to have you with us. And today we're going to talk about exploring the intersection of generative AI and assessment. And in case you're not familiar with us, the Technology-Based Assessment Committee promotes the joint ITC-ATP guidelines for technology-based assessments, which came out about 1.5 years ago. And we're also encouraging best practice in assessment using technology. And we're in the process of working on a few documents about AI and good practice about AI. We run these webinars about every quarter. And if you want to see recordings of our previous roundtables, they're on that YouTube channel, and we'll put this one there as well. We will make the slides available if you want the slides. Ping any one of us. We've got 4 speakers today. For those of you who don't know me, I'm John Kleeman. I'm the chair of the TBA committee, and I'm also an EVP at Lunosity, the assessment technology company. Pat?
Hi, everyone. I'm Pat Ward. I'm the president of Internet Testing Systems, or ITS. Mostly focused on the technology side. So great to be here.
Kimberly?
And I'm Kimberly Swygert. I'm the secretary of the TBA committee, and I am a psychometrician at the National Board of Medical Examiners, currently the director of test development innovations.
And John.
Hello, and I'm John Weiner. I was the co-editor of the TBA guidelines, and I'm now principal of JW Advisors, an advisory services firm.
Thank you. And if anybody has any questions, we will try and have time for questions at the end, but feel free to also put them in the chat. I'm sharing my screen, so probably won't get to them, but my colleagues will. And we've also got some members of the AI subcommittee online who may also as well. So we're going to start off in a moment by asking you the 3 provocative questions, or 3 questions in a way, that we said we would do so in our promo, and then we're going to, each of the 4 of us, talk about 4 topics. I'm going to talk about how generative AI can make us more efficient. Kimberly's going to talk about governance, policies, and responsible ethical AI. Pat's going to talk about assessment security with generative AI, and then John is going to talk about the future of assessment in the world of AI. And then we're each going to give you a very quick answers to the 3 questions, share some resources, and then hopefully have a little bit of time for Q&A. With that, let me hand over to Pat.
All right, thanks, John. Yes, so as John mentioned, we really wanted to start with 3 questions, and they are provocative questions that I think will depend on which program you are with, and the answers may change over time. I mean, what's going to happen over the next 5 years? I mean, it's sort of amazing what's already going on. So with that said, let me jump into the first question. So will testing become obsolete due to generative AI? So, I mean, the thing to think about here is, if knowledge is at everyone's fingertips, does knowledge-based testing even make sense anymore? Question number 2. Does your organization really understand the impact that the generative AI will have on the assessment? And then number 3, has the definition of cheating changed, or does it need to change? And what we're thinking about here is, if that generative AI is becoming such a part of jobs, right? Developers have tools, everyone's got tools now. So how does that change the fact of what we're doing? And what does that mean from a cheating perspective? So I think these are great questions, and sort of to set it up, we're going to jump into these 4 topics that we mentioned. We're going to go through a little bit more in depth and not directly answering it. And then after that, we're going to do kind of a whip around where each of us is going to give an opinion. So with that said, let me introduce John Kleeman, who's going to start us off.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk about how generative AI makes us more efficient. And thought I'd like to start by just giving you a summary. I know several of you, or many of you, were there, but of AI at the ATP Innovations in Anaheim, California in March. There were about over 1,000 people there, and AI was a significant focus of the conference. There were over 30 presentations on AI, and obviously I didn't attend all of those, but there were generally two main categories. There were general presentations and panels covering subjects such as strategy, governance, and regulations. And then there were presentations sharing experience of using AI, and mostly that was on content creation, mostly experimental or pilot use. And many of these AI sessions were very, very well attended. And if you're thinking of coming to EATP in October in Berlin, I'm sure there'll be more sessions on AI there. In the exhibit hall, most vendors were offering some flavor of AI to help items. It was mostly using general purpose models, securely hosted for protection, particularly GPT-4 and Claude, but there's at least one vendor offering custom models. In terms of generative AI generally and what it can do, these 6 things are some of the things that it can do, which are applicable to assessment, but also other things. So any kind of writing, it really helps make you more efficient. Oral content creation, it's good at summarizing things. It's good at making personalized stuff, so potentially personalizing assessments or other things for different people. It's great for idea generation. If you're stuck on something, it can give you some ideas. And it also can be used to review documents or other things, and as we'll see in a moment, questions, potentially to improve fairness or for other reasons. And it's also good for research. The key drawbacks, as you perhaps know, are that it makes mistakes, sometimes called hallucinations, so that you can't rely on it, and also it can be biased. So it's been trained on data out on the internet that itself may be biased, and there's a big chance that generative AI will be biased. And so for any sort of serious use, it needs a human in the loop. It's unsafe to run it fully automated. Item writing is perhaps the most widely used area that is used in assessment. And the way this works, it obviously varies between different providers, but essentially the author sets the topic, the level, or other things within a user interface, defines what kind of question or questions they want. Then the software behind the scenes makes a prompt for the AI model. And sometimes that can include a chapter or book or other material to help the model. And sometimes people actually fine-tune or other things the model to make it better for a domain area. Then the AI generates the questions, and some people use it just for generating distractors, not the questions. It can be used for either or a variety of different things. And then really important, the author must review, and usually if it's for a high stakes assessment, they'll go through a whole review cycle. And then you can either reject it or accept it or adjust it. And different organizations have different models, but that's roughly how it works. But there are hundreds of other use cases for generative AI, and I'm sure lots of use cases that people haven't found yet. Here on the screen are some of the examples. I won't read them all out, but it can be used for job analysis, for creating images, for meta tagging, for item review, for creating alt text for images, various use cases in registration, in delivery. You can have a sort of chatbot question type that elucidates information. You can use it for assisting proctors, for translating. And then a big potential use case is scoring, for making transcripts of audio or visual answers, or scoring open-ended responses, but providing you have human review, because it can make errors and it can be biased. And reporting use cases as well. So there's lots and lots and lots of other use cases, but there's just a sample. If you're using AI for item writing, then some key considerations. It's really critical to have human review. It's an aid to authors, it's not a replacement, and that review must include bias review. There is a real risk of questions having implicit bias. You've got to accept that the item may not be copyrightable. Obviously varies by jurisdiction, but in the US, it's largely not copyrightable. Also accept the item may not be unique, because it could potentially create the same item for 2 different organizations. You really need to ensure that the dialogue and item are not used for training AI. If you use any reputable provider, they're going to ensure that, but it's something to be careful with. If you're using it for certification, there's a slight risk that if you train your AI on material that's also used for training, then you might breach that training certification firewall, something to look at. Also, security is really important, because these items are if they're used for high stakes tests, you need to control this like other item bank software. And it's good in a lot of different domains. A lot of people have very good experience with it, but it is better in some domains than others. Just thought I'd give you a quick demo of how AI can help find bias. So here is this is just some software from Lunosity work in progress. Here's a question: if it takes a cleaning lady 1 hour to clean 3 classrooms, how many cleaning ladies does a school with 100 classrooms need if the cleaning all needs to be done within 4 hours? Well, obviously, that's not a very ideal question. So we're working on a DEI checker, which will look at this from a variety of different angles. And here, the term cleaning lady unnecessarily genders a profession that can be formed by any gender, be more inclusive to use a gender neutral term. So although AI does potentially have bias, it can also be used to help find bias, and in this case, come up with a different version of the question that's more gender neutral. So in a moment, I'm going to hand over to the others to make any comments on efficiency. I just wanted to share a few thoughts on human in the loop before then. And at the present stage, human in the loop is really, really important, but it's slightly hard to define what we mean by it. It's not just having a human rubber stamp what the AI is doing. You really need human oversight everywhere and potentially at multiple stages. And essentially, it complements the AI's limitations in judgment and discretion, because AI is very good, but it doesn't have a lot of judgment and incorporate broader social and moral concerns. So I think Kimberly will be talking more about this in a moment. But before we go there, John, Pat, Kimberly, would you like to jump in on the efficiency angle? One of you?
Sure, I will. I was in an interesting meeting yesterday, and I think, Pat, you were in that meeting too. And I was struck by the point that you made about the inclusion of AI tools within a testing system, especially item banking, I think is considered table stakes or getting to be table stakes. I thought that was interesting. Do you want to elaborate on that, Pat?
Well, I'm part of the CTO group for ATP. So we talk about, it's a lot of different providers and vendors and programs. These days, just about every provider has a system, and the core technology is shared, right? It's the OpenAIs and the Microsofts of the world who are creating this. And so we're just sort of taking advantage of it and then plugging in, it's the use of it. So having a basic system is table stakes. So it's how we use it and where we're going to use it and how we support it that's going to make the difference. So it's an interesting change. The world is changing.
Indeed.
Kimberly, want to add anything?
Sure. It's fascinating for me to follow this because I feel like I've always worked at MBME. I've been there so long, and our items are so lengthy. They're complex. They require the examinee to synthesize information. We've always relied on that being generated in its entirety by human experts, by board certified physicians. And looking at when generative AI first came out, I was like, oh, I don't know if that's ever going to be able to do it. And now I think the answer is different. So for me, just watching the speed at which generative AI algorithms and applications are able to handle much more complex items and content to be generated is amazing, because I would not have guessed to feel like now that we are almost there if you'd asked me last year.
Interesting. So now, Kimberly, would you like to talk us through governance policies and responsible ethical AI?
Sure, but thank you. So I will turn our attention, as John has mentioned and has already set us up for, to the topic of responsible and ethical use of AI. So the idea that we should create and find rules to follow about using technology, and that we need to find a balance between going full speed, something new, and being overly cautious. So this that concept is not new. It's not specific to AI as a technology. However, if you look at some of the current discourse on AI in the public arena and in business reporting, you may very well see the idea of ethical guidelines or restraints or responsible use or regulation described with phrases such as, this is stifling, this is based on fear, this is something that can kill innovation potential, it can be counterproductive. So I tried to think through potential mindsets as to why someone might decide, okay, we're just going to focus on the technical piece first. We're just going to worry about that piece. We can leave all the ethical stuff to later. And in thinking about that, 2 reasons for why you might do that come to mind. The first reason is you're a horrible person, which I don't think applies to this audience. However, the public is, excuse me, extremely aware about malicious or careless uses of AI at the moment. So much so that I don't think it would be wise for any organization to start off with the assumption that the public is on your side and eager to see you use AI. There are bad actors out there. There are people who have been harmed by bad actors or just careless deployment of AI, generative AI, other kinds of AI. And so your customers, your test takers, your stakeholders might not be starting with a neutral approach about AI, because there's so much material out there that when I started looking, I realized there's a textbook on the topic, which I haven't read, the one that I'm showing here, but I would like to. But the cover art fascinates me because I think the vibe they were going for was a cross between Dante's Inferno and 2001. So you can let me know in the chat if you see something different in that image, but I just thought this part was fascinating. So next slide. So the other potential reason that I think is much more likely for this group is you just don't know where to start when it comes to thinking about an ethical framework for the use of generative AI. That is understandable. AI is moving fast. Again, as I mentioned, generative AI has come leaps and bounds in a relatively short amount of time. Many groups are using it, they're thinking about using it, and if you're at an organization, there could be pressure from leadership to get something developed and get it in production before there's attention given to that responsible use part of it. And because this can seem like a high hurdle, I'm just going to recommend some ways you can get started, introduce some common ethical principles, and suggest some approaches to governance. So before you begin thinking about ethical and responsible use guidelines, there's 2 places I recommend you start, and that's with the why of AI and the how of AI. And the why is something that Mark Weinstein brought up recently on LinkedIn, and I've seen it referred to in appropriate business uses for AI. And it's a good reminder to make sure that you have explicitly stated and laid out the reasons you're thinking about using AI somewhere in your business processes. Ethical use is context specific. Governance is going to be context specific. Regulation may very well be context specific. And you should be starting at the point of what is the business issue or problem that your specific use of AI is intended to solve, or what's the opportunity that it's going to provide for your organization. The second thing I would recommend before you begin is that if you don't know even the basics of using AI, to try to get some education or hands-on experience. This is something that Matthias van Deveer has spoken about quite a bit, and I agree with him wholeheartedly. It is going to be very challenging for you to address AI from an ethical perspective and support development of guidelines and policies if you're not at all familiar with how it works. For example, if you want to create policies with the goal of mitigating bias in training data, this is going to be more difficult if you don't know how to build and label and use a training data set. And this doesn't mean that you have to become an expert, because we can't all be Matthias, but it's never been easier to take some coursework, to get a Pluralsight account or Udemy account, learn a little bit of Python or R, at least learn the basic vocabulary about machine learning versus deep learning versus neural networks. That's going to make it so much easier to understand what the more technical AI experts you may be working with are bringing to the table and what their ethical perspective is, because they're probably going to come with one that is built in, and then how you can work with them and develop an ethical AI framework that can then apply across the organization and across staff with a variety of technical skills. And then just start doing some reading. A lot of the reading is fairly accessible. Thilo Hagendorf is one of my favorite authors. I like his Ethics of AI ethics paper from 2021 very much. You can find a lot out there, whether it's Google Scholar or whether you ask ChatGPT about ethical AI in your field. And then I found it extremely helpful to read papers I think I'm going to disagree with, because, for example, I've learned that if a paper has manifesto in its title, I'm probably going to disagree with a lot of it. But I still read those because I am very curious to see the perspective they're coming from And a lot of times, if it's someone who has an axe to grind against AI, they will be speaking directly to some of these ethical principles. And next slide. And next, you have frameworks to start from. You don't have to start from a blank page. All of the organizations listed here have published ethical or responsible sets of guidelines within the last year or two. And in reviewing these, I've looked for what, both what they all include and how they might differ. And one of the major differences I've seen is that on one end, some responsible use AI guidelines that are public, they're minimalistic, they're high level, and they're very specific to just how an organization is going to use AI. On the other end of the spectrum, you may come across frameworks, and I think Duolingo is one of these that's a good example. They're detailed and they're integrated with psychometric processes and test development processes. So it's actually embedded in, here's what we already do to create tests, and here's exactly how AI is going to fit into that. And neither one of these is right and wrong, but one of them might be a more appropriate choice for your organization, for your use cases of AI, and how you want to communicate out to your stakeholders. The NBME approach at the moment is that we formed an internal cross-unit team to develop both high-level public guidelines that will be those kind of concise guidelines about how we use AI within our assessment context. And then we're also developing internal guidelines that we intend to be specific enough that if we hired a new NLP researcher and we hired another new non-technical person who might be working with AI content, that those internal guidelines can serve in onboarding and to ensure that everybody who comes on board is aware of how we do things and can follow our best practices. Next slide. So with the shortest amount of time that I have, I'm not going to go into great detail other than to say that I have seen these 5 emerge across almost every framework I've seen presented, not just related to assessment, but also you will see them in assessment as well. Transparency is about the level and extent to which you're going to explain your use of AI to your stakeholders and end users and make what you're doing understandable to them. Human oversight, which John has already mentioned, absolutely crucial. And it's about where you draw the line to reserve certain decisions, evaluation, maybe even creation for human experts only, where that part is explicitly something you are not going to automate, and it might be a very big piece of the defensibility of your use case. The data privacy piece, you can lump legal and accountability under here as well. It's a huge topic, probably expensive. I meant to say extensive, but expensive applies. Highly regulated, and it is related directly to your user's right to ownership and privacy of their data that you might collect or compile as part of creating or using AI in an assessment context. Fairness and bias mitigation is probably going to sound second nature to this group. This part speaks specifically to the idea that we're considering the impact of our use of AI on decisions and our responsibility to ensure those decisions are as error-free and as free of unintended negative consequences as possible. Then finally, promotion of human values. Sometimes it's stated as beneficence, meaning you should only use AI for social good. Sometimes it's non-maleficence, which allows you to also use it in cases where it's neutral. So it's starting with the assumption you're not a bad actor, but you may want to give more or less weight to this concept of how you're going to use AI and how that's going to promote the social good. Next slide. And a couple of other principles that might apply more directly to the use of AI in assessment. I've got accuracy and reliability here, and defensibility and validity. Again, terms I think this group is going to be very familiar with. And in thinking of an ethical principle for an AI use in this context, this is over and above all those psychometric factors and standards. How do those impact your ethical factors? For example, if you're using AI in automated scoring, it may be that the accuracy of that output is absolutely the most important thing. That might mean that you are using a very complex model that's not going to be very transparent or explainable to your users. So that is going to be a trade-off you need to address to say, are we willing to sacrifice accuracy if we need to make something more transparent, or are we not? So it's going to essentially interact with some of the other ethical factors in the framework you might have in place. And then there are going to be some factors specifically to your examinees. Things like, are you legally required to allow them to opt out of decisions or products that might use AI? Do you have to take extra steps to show that you have protected their data? Do you have to agree not to ever use their data for any kind of training data if they are able to opt out of that, and so on? Next slide. And then in terms of governance and policies, I mean, I've already mentioned the legal piece here a little bit, that in and of itself can be intimidating, but absolutely don't neglect that piece. I think the legal landscape is rapidly changing along with the rest of AI. There are maps, if you look, that will show you like a US map and where there's legislation by different states with respect to AI use. And then there's established European regulations such as the EU AI Act. So this might be worth meeting with a specialist or lawyer, if you have not already, to get them on board about the idea that this legal landscape is something that you're going to have to track along with sort of the AI technological innovation piece. And ideally, you would use all of this information to develop a set of guidelines for your organizations that will fit within your existing internal policies for how you do work. That
Kimberly,
will be...
we probably should wrap this up in a few seconds, if that's okay.
Yep, I will. That would be applicable to your work scenario, positive, and is going to support oversight. I'm going to give the TBA AI subcommittee document a plug, because there's going to be a document coming out soon that's intended to be helpful for organizations for creating responsible AI use policies. And the next slide is my last slide, where I just found a quote that I liked and said, hey, maybe we should think more actively about using AI for social good to support humanity. So for that, I will open it up to the panel.
I think we probably got to jump onto Pat's section and maybe cover this a bit at the end, if that's okay.
Sorry about that.
No, it was really interesting. Kimberly, you're a world expert in this, and I'm sure other people find it fascinating too. I don't think you're sorry. We can share these slides if anybody wants to ping us.
Yes, we will share the slides.
Yep.
Okay, then we'll move to Pat for his topic.
Okay, thanks, Kimberly. Yeah, I have to admit, I always want to jump in with your stuff. It's always interesting. So, we were doing our planning session for this, and it was right about the time Microsoft was announcing a new feature where they're integrating some AI with their operating system. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And so, with everything that's great with AI, and I'm a massive fan, there is a few rain clouds that come along. And so I'm going to talk about the security aspect, just to sort of touch on that. So the question I have for you is, have you heard about this new Microsoft Windows feature called Copilot plus Recall? And if you haven't heard about it, it's a new Windows feature. They announced it about a month ago. It was planned to be released in mid-June, and there was actually such an outcry about the scariness of this from a security perspective that they pulled it back, and they're actually restructuring it. But it's still coming, and it's still kind of important, and it sort of shows what you need to do. And what it's doing is basically, it's taking screenshots and converting them to text of everything that you do. So if you bring up a messaging system, or you send an email, or you watch a presentation, you're on a Teams meeting, every single thing that you do, it's basically putting in a data store. And then it's having a local model, an AI system, super cool, and it goes through, and then it provides you information back and sort of guidance. So if you're looking for information, it pulls it for you. And it's storing all this information locally, which is what scared everybody. So should you be frightened of this? Yes, you should actually be frightened. While it's super cool, the security concept that everything that you do is sort of saved off in one central spot is scary. The initial reviews also had some security problems, like they weren't encrypted properly. They have actually addressed that or are addressing that. So the security is getting a lot better, but it's still a little bit frightening. But from an assessment perspective, if you deliver an assessment at home and it's not through a secure browser, or if your secure browser is limited, and a lot of the secure browsers are limited in this way, any of that test content that's actually being displayed will be just snapped up and stored and allowed for somebody to go back and review it. So the good news on that is that there is a secure, if you do have good secure browsers, you can protect your assessment, but you're not going to be protecting your personal communications on it. Go to the next slide. So, is it really going to be this bad? It's got so many red flags that Microsoft actually has already adjusted to it. It's worth doing some searching on this. Just search for Windows recall reviews and you'll pick up some stuff. But the big thing that Microsoft is doing is they're allowing people to turn it off. So that's great for the people protecting themselves. But if you do turn it on and you're okay with it, and your examinees might be, that doesn't help you as an assessment provider. So you need to be aware of that from that perspective. John? So the other thing about AI is, are there other cheating issues to consider? And yes, let's start with the fact that AI is amazingly good at answering the test questions. If you go look at some of the OpenAI documents, they actually brag about it, and they tell you how their models do against standardized tests. So they go out and actually check things. I assume using practice tests, but it doesn't really change the concept of how they're doing. And they handle everything. They handle essays and multiple choice and matching questions, and they'll pick up images and pull the text from the images, reading passages and things like that. You can actually get free plugins now for a browser, like if you use Chrome or Edge or something like that. You can get a free plugin and click on it, and it'll basically look at your content and answer your question for you. And some of these tools are actually being built now where they actually work against secure browsers. So if you have your certain secure browser, especially if it's a public one that's well known, go out there and search, you'll find out there's actually tools that will actually work against that. So what can you do about it? Well, it is still basically the secure browser, or it's an app, is still the solution. We have my company actually has an at-home program that we use for doctor recertification. And we're using sort of an app that it runs in a window, but we're basically moving people to that, and that'll protect them against that. But you need something, right? You need to have something. And you got to be careful, because some of the free secure browsers out there, like Microsoft has a free take a test thing, they don't actually protect you. So watch out for that stuff, right? You want something and somebody who's investing in it from an assessment perspective. There's so many ways you can actually go into it. And what they're doing, and this will ring a bell for some people who have children, who are into gaming. They're using basically the same technologies they use to cheat with games, right? It's the same way they kind of do hooks and actually change games to do things. That's the kind of stuff that they're doing to hack this. It's really nice, really hardcore hacking techniques that they go to do this. So I wanted to just give a quick demo of go ahead, John, start it, of a simple test here. And what we're going to do, if you look at the little mouse cursor, you'll see basically that the mouse cursor is not on the answer being done. That's because what we're doing in this is we're basically taking a test and hitting a hotkey with an application that sits there. And this is running in an older secure browser, and it's basically looking at the content, including tables, and in this case, a reading passage with multiple questions on the screen, and it's automatically answering it for you. And you'll notice that if you're a proctor on this, and this software is on that particular machine, and recognize that on any machine we're taking it home, it's their machine, you can't tell, right? In this case, it's a reading task. It's got lots of other information in there, and it's going to go and actually figure out what the thing is, and the answers are good, right? I mean, it's not only answering the questions correctly. Early models were getting, say about 70, 80%. They're close to 100% now, and the essays are actually extremely well done. So it's getting quite scary. Expect this sort of thing to be out there, especially for academic programs. If you have an academic assessment program, they're looking to do this sort of cheating in colleges, and they're doing it today. Good, John. So the question is, what can you do? And I like to come back to test design, but I want to throw out, more items is not the solution. For my entire career, it was always, security was always, oh, just add more items, right? That'll solve the problem, right? That's not actually the answer anymore, right? Because the AI doesn't really care about full depth. It's just reading the question and analyzing it. For a while, we were looking at it thinking, block the network traffic to the AI. That's good. And that's still a good solution that blocks most of them. But now you can put local models on your machine. So local models are actually really good. But what about other stuff that matters? Yeah, well, so there are some things. Time-limited questions can make a difference. The AI can take a few seconds to go do, and it helps a little bit. Time-limited helps more with the concept where they're running in a regular browser. I don't know if I can find that person. We got somebody talking. If you put the artifacts with the question, like reading passages and exhibits and things like that, if they're not on the same page, those applications can't grab it at the same time as the question. That can be very effective, and that can solve the problem. Of course, it's not as nice of an experience, but sometimes the advanced item types, they're much better at multiple choice. They'll be less better at things like matching. And if you go really hardcore and do something more performance-based, they won't help you at all. So performance-based item types are always the best if you can do that, and it makes sense for your program, which it doesn't for some programs. And John, one more. So, it's worth mentioning, can you tell if somebody uses AI? Like, if they write an essay or something like that, if I'm watching them. The problem is you can't, right? Your traditional questions, of course, is ABC. You can't really tell. There's work out there for doing essay detection, but the thing is, as the essays get better and better at writing, it's just words, right? You can't tell that somebody actually wrote it for you. Not if they don't put a signature in it, and they're not going to. So there's really no way. And then, remote, everything gets worse with remote. When you get into remote proctoring, the candidate controls the environment. The examinee controls the environment. That means they can do whatever they want. They can hide cameras and do things. But from an examinee perspective, they're going to look normal, right? They're just going to be hitting a key. If you have multi-camera, it might help. It'll stop them from using a different device, maybe. But it's still a problem, right? So remote proctors can't, and it's an issue with remote proctoring. And just to finish up my stuff. So I did want to just, because I hate being the negative guy. So I just want to point out that it's going to be okay. This thing with cheaters is not early. And this has been going on since the beginning of testing. There was cheaters, and we find ways to block it. And that's going to happen here as well. Nothing's really changing on that. You want to make sure, you want to ask your provider about this. You want to make sure they have solutions. There's lots of places out there to get those solutions. You want to, if you're a provider and you're listening to this, make sure you're getting third-party audits and make sure you're doing it annually. This stuff is changing so much. And it's not something that's tomorrow, it's something that's today, right? It's going on right now. So that said, I am going to hand it off. Well, actually, do I have time for questions, John, or answers?
I think we probably should go on to John, unless anybody has a very quick comment, Kimberly or John.
I think we should go forward.
Okay.
So I get to talk about the future in 6 minutes.
No, you've got 7 or 8 minutes. Don't worry,
okay.
or even 9.
No problem then. Okay, excellent. Well, let's start with some background on the next slide. And so, obviously, there's technology advances, but there's underlying trends that are happening as a result of these that I want to talk about a little bit because they're driving what's happening, in my opinion. This is all my opinion, of course. So I want to talk a little about the automation of work as an underlying driver, which is causing change in human requirements and shifting that focus and impacting a lot in terms of the what, how, and why around assessment. So that's what I'd like to focus on in the next few slides, if you will. Let's take a closer look. Next slide. So if we look at the automation of work, this is something that's been happening for a long time, for centuries actually, but I started in the 70s when things really picked up in terms of automation and technology. We all saw what happened in manufacturing and industrial applications. And there was a lot of displacement and sort of a realignment of work. In the 90s, we saw not just, we weren't with chatbots yet, but we had a lot of automation of administrative and customer service. At the turn of the millennium, we've seen finance, marketing, engineering type roles being impacted. And now, since November of 2022, the game-changing generative AI developments, all work is being impacted, and this has implications. I always like to review the World Economic Forum's future jobs reports that come out about every year or so, and latest forecasts are about 50% of the tasks performed today in businesses are going to be automated within a few years. And as that continues, it's going to have an impact. And there are other reports too, that many of them out there that speculate on this. And so thinking about, well, what can AI actually replicate? As I mentioned, that it's the generative AI that's really kind of been game changing, not just writing and replicating speech, drawing, music, and art. This was a big issue in my hometown in Los Angeles with the writers and actors who are genuinely concerned about generative AI, infringing on what they do in terms of creation and so forth. Thank you. And, many others, I think someone needs to mute. And many other capabilities. I think one other I'll call out is recommending as part of a reasoning capability. Recommending that's being picked up in education. We're used to that with Amazon and Netflix, but recommender systems are being used in educational programs too, in terms of learning recommendations. So we see what the capabilities are with AI. They're not perfect, of course. They are impressive, and the thing is, they're quickly improving, and they're only going up. They're not getting worse. Someone might argue with me on that, but I'll just say that they're quickly improving. So let's consider now what AI doesn't do well, and maybe what on the next slide, and what humans should focus on. If you would go to the next slide, please. And so, we're in the AI age now, kind of surpassing the information age that happened before. What capabilities do humans need? Well, this was something that actually educators were focused on at the end of the last century, when they were saying, well, students, need more, they need different. The world is changing in the information age. And so the whole 21st century skill movement was born. And a variety of models, emerged, but sort of at the common core was this idea of the 4 C's of communication, collaboration, creativity, and critical thinking. And these are sort of core elements that have been adopted in educational programs, at least in the US today. And this whole 21st century skills movement is kind of taking hold. People are recognizing this important shift. And I've argued recently that with AI, there's additional skills that need to be added to the list. And the list I have here comes from a slide presented at NCME, where now we have newer skills around, prompt engineering, critical evaluation, threat awareness, being adaptable, ethical, having learning agility, and I'll highlight leadership at all levels. And this is a concept that it's been out for a while, but I think it's amplified by the availability of a digital co-pilot that you have now, that you have to lead and direct. You have to ask the right questions and give the right direction to. Everyone's a leader. It's fascinating. So we have this idea now with disposable skills that there's a churn in skills that are being automated. And then we have more durable skills that are more what I think the 21st century skills and other skills like that are becoming more prominent. And this is kind of an interesting dichotomy that's happening. In terms of the disposable skills, there's this whole movement now for reskilling. It's important. Continuous learning is much more important now. So if we go to the next slide, we see these scenarios at play. Let's talk a little bit about now, how do these combine with technology capabilities, and what does it mean for the future of assessment? I'm thinking in terms of 4 buckets here, in terms of, there's going to be a lot of change. There already is change and impact. I mean, we already talked about table stakes for systems have changed. So how assessments are created, John gave some good use cases there. I won't dwell on that. but I'll just say it's going to get better and more automated and more seamless and integrated. But I'll focus on the last three in terms of, well, what are we measuring? That's going to change quite a bit. How we measure, and then how and why we're measuring. I think that the impact here for the future, as I gaze into my crystal ball, looking at the trends that we've already seen and the technologies that are evolving and emerging, you know, what's going to be measured and emphasized more is the non-technical, non-rote knowledge, and more about non-cognitive capabilities like collaboration and creativity and things of that nature, innovation type things, focusing more on these areas. And the way that these are going to be measured, I think this was touched on earlier, I don't know, is the multiple choice question reaching its shelf life? I'll just pose that as a question. Maybe we'll get into that more later, but I think there's going to be a much more need for constructed response, you know, speech-based, performance-based assessment, simulations, actually embedding generative AI in the assessment. The ability to use Gen AI is a life skill now. MBA programs are now in the US are now incorporating this in terms of what people are being required to do. So as we look at the future, the use of Gen AI is going to be normal in school. It's normal in work with digital co-pilots. So I think it'll be normal on assessment. So it might, I'll save some of this for the future discussion we're going to have in a minute, but I think it has a lot of implications. And then I'll quickly say, in terms of use, the integration between assessment and learning is going to become tighter, bigger, a bigger role. Assessment will play a bigger role than it already does. And you know, the ability that we have now, and we'll have even more so, is in terms of reporting, feedback and reporting that's personalized, tailored to the individual's performance, having the ability to support the need for continuous learning and development and reskilling through integrated learning modules and assessment tools. So assessment's going to have a, you know, we've always had formative assessment, but now it's going to be more on steroids and just totally technology enabled. So that's exciting. I could go a lot longer, but I think I just want to conclude on the next slide and just say that really what we have is a scenario where there's disruption happening in work and learning. It's creating opportunities and challenges, but these are good and these are positive, and that you know, the role for assessment, I think in some ways is elevated in terms of its support for continuous learning and development with all the change, continuous change. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Kimberly or Pat, would you either of you like to jump in with a very quick comment on either that or one of the earlier things before we go to answering the three questions?
I'll just say I love John's future of assessment slide. I think it's got a lot of great stuff actually embedded there that I agree with on you know, how it's measured and how it's used and all those things. And it brings me back to what Kimberly was talking about, the why. And the why is partially to be ready, right? It's changing. And this is part of our next, you know, the big question, but it is changing and it's going to change, and you need to be ready.
Thank you. Kimberly, any?
Yeah, no, just wanted to say I'm glad John brought up the example of generative AI causing stress amongst the creative crowd in terms in Hollywood because that's exactly what I was thinking of when I said we may see the technical potential and innovation here, but that doesn't mean that our audience or our stakeholders are excited to hear us talk about AI or starting with a neutral mindset. They may be starting with some negative mindset towards it, and we may need to be ready to address that.
Interesting. And my only comment would be, we've seen multiple choice questions. Everybody's saying they're terrible and need to go for decades. Yeah. And I think they still have a lot of value, but we'll see. We'll see. You might be right. So, Kimberly, do you want to walk us through the panel's answers to the three questions?
Yes, so let's go back to what Pat was saying in the beginning when he posed 3 questions for us. And the first one was, will testing become obsolete due to generative AI? I'm going to start off with my really quick answer to say no, it's not going to become obsolete. It's important. It's always going to be important for people to have some amount of knowledge, skills, and abilities. Those are going to change. I think John's argument supports that. But as long as they have to have them, it's going to be important for us to assess those things and make decisions based on those assessments. I do think what's going to change is absolutely what people are going to know and what they're going to know how to do, have to know how to do, and that's going to be change across all fields.
Pat, you've got
All right,
30
Pat,
seconds.
you're up.
Okay, yeah, I mean, absolutely, it's not going to become obsolete, but it's going to change. We know it's going to change. We talked about some of the things performance-based. You know, I was thinking about how I have some clients, we do some oral-based assessment, and they're starting to ask about having the, you know, bots actually handle the oral discussion with potential candidates so they can actually handle larger volumes of this sort of thing. It's changing, and it's going to be fun to watch.
John?
Yeah, well, I'll just say that our ideas of what constitutes a test are going to be different. So in some ways, you know, we may not recognize a test of the future. Of course, it depends what context we're talking about, and change is always uneven and kind of follows a wave. So that's what I'll say, is that I do think that in some arenas, what we think of a test today may not really exist, but in others it probably will. But there's no doubt that the purpose, the how, what, and why of testing is going through a seismic shift. It will.
And so my answer is that not in the short term, and perhaps not to generative AI, but I do think other kinds of AI might make testing obsolete. Machine learning is really good at classifying. If you look at some of the work done in, say, medical diagnosis, and I'm wondering if one day AI will be able to classify people's knowledge and skills very accurately and reliably, and then testing might become superseded.
All right, next question. Has the definition of cheating changed, or does it need to change because of this? And John, you're up first.
Well, I started touching on this, and then I realized I didn't want to steal my own thunder. And yeah, I think that the use, like Pat is talking about, rightfully right now, screening for our people using generative AI to take a test. And I think the definition of cheating will change because generative AI is used on the job, will be used more on the job. It'll be used in education. It'll be part of what people do educationally and in the workplace. So it just needs to be incorporated into the test. And as tests become more performance-based, which they can and should, they already are becoming that way in education with, you know, stealth assessment and things like that. People going through a process, and at the end they've been assessed. They don't take a test because it's built in. So there are scenarios like that. I'm not saying it's 100% in all, replace all testing, but there's certainly a movement in that direction. So cheating in many ways may not be exist as we know it.
So I totally agree with John. We have a program we work with Microsoft that introduced sort of learning, allowing people to get to learning content through searching as they take the assessment. AI is going to be kind of like that. It's been extremely well received, and the idea is we have to sort of change. Giving them the tools is part of the job now, right? And giving them access to that. I also kind of want to make a quick mention that having AI threaten security is kind of a good thing in some ways, because we need a little bit of a wake-up call to tighten some of these things up as we've gone into the remote proctoring. And this will be a good spot to actually really tighten it across the industry.
So I'd like to slightly disagree, because I think testing is all about validity. So tests seek to fairly measure knowledge and skills, and if you're cheating, you're trying to subvert the fair score in a way that reduces validity. So AI might change what is tested or ways of cheating, like Pat, you've been talking about, but is essentially seeking to subvert the test. So there might be minor changes, but I don't think the definition really changes. It's substantially the same.
Yeah, and I agree with John. I think that no matter what we roll out, there will be people who try to break the rules. I think the system will change, the rules will change, but I will be interested to see if applications of AI can do a better job of defending the processes and the rules of testing, but we're never going to get away from people who are going to see something and say, oh, let me break that. Let me get around that. Let me see if I can figure out a way to gain that. So it's just going to be interesting to see where that goes in the future.
Yeah, we would agree with that.
Yeah. And then finally, does your organization really understand the impact that generative AI will have on assessment? So John Kleeman, you're up first.
So I would say no, both for my organization and any organization, because generative AI is just at the very beginning of its development. It's only going to improve. Anybody who thinks they understand its impact is almost certainly wrong. I think you need to have an open mind to be prepared to be flexible.
Yeah, I agree. I think the point I want to make here is I think that this question is a great topic for a strategic exercise, some kind of a SWOT analysis or variation of that with a diverse stakeholder group to gather their ideas about this question. And I'd love to organize a time capsule exercise on this if anybody's interested, to capture from a diverse stakeholder group. I mean, including assessment industry and out of industry people to talk about this, capture the ideas and see how forecasts hold up. That was my reaction to this question.
And I agree with John Kleeman that we don't understand this because no one does yet. But my optimism is that we should remember we already do know a lot of things and that we shouldn't assume that's all going to get tossed out the window with AI. Because for those of us old enough to remember pre-internet days, the internet was a huge change, but that didn't mean all the knowledge we had got tossed out the window. We just had to learn some new ways to do things and some new potentials. So I think we should be optimistic that it will be understandable, at least manageable in the future. But I think that does start with admitting that we don't really understand it yet because it's also new and it's changing so fast.
So I love what all you guys are saying. And I think the word that always jumps out to me is evolving. You know, I live and breathe this. And my understanding and opinions have changed over the last year or so. And I think it's something you have to keep revisiting on a regular basis. You have to keep tweaking your strategies and you have to be on top of it. And I do think that most organizations are not quite appreciative of how pervasive this is across just about everything you do inside your organization.
So thank you, and we'll just, I think, put time for maybe one question if anybody wants to put a question in the chat. And
yeah,
I
think we need a question, John. There are some great comments in the chat, excellent comments. I'm not sure if I saw anything that was a question.
Do you want to read out perhaps one or two of the comments that are great? And here on the screen is some references that might be interesting to people.
Well, I'll just point to Jim Henderson's the last one here is, I've always considered that a big part of using AI is having the expertise to correctly identify when the AI's output is correct or not, as well as in the case of AI copilots, knowing how to ask it what you want it to do so it produces a correct result. Yes, prompt engineering. That's a good point, Jim. There's a lot behind what you're saying there, obviously. Excellent point. Okay, John, back to you.
Well, I think unless anybody has, there's something just come in the chat.
Well, I'll mention, Timmy actually had one of my favorite quotes. I paraphrase this, I heard it somewhere else, but your job or your career is not going to be taken over by AI. It's going to be taken over by somebody who knows how to use AI better than you. I do love that as a general quote.
Yeah, I saw that comes from an IBM report originally, a version of that anyway. Maybe that's just become a common folklore thing, but it's a good one.
It's a great one. It's worth repeating in however many ways you say it.
It is a good one. Yeah, I totally agree with you.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody, for joining our webinar. Please stay tuned. The ATP is doing a lot of things in AI. There's a security summit, there's a EATP, and there'll be innovations next year. TBA committee will be running more webinars. Thank you, and we'll be sharing a recording on the YouTube channel, and also can share the slides on request. Thank you very much for listening.
Yeah,
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.